Why not, concerning the Sabbath, just simplify, refer all to what God's word says? Why bring in a non-believer's view, no matter how well it's written? He's talking about our reference to Heschel and the book, The Sabbath. We
good.
reference Abraham Heschel, and I said that book was absolutely excellent. It's actually one of the things that started to bring me back to a want to keep the Sabbath, because I had fallen away, and actually I started falling away from the faith, or moving away from the faith, I should say, when I was in Israel. And so the Sabbath was really, by the time I got back to the U.S., I could care less. But one of the things that really kind of grabbed me and brought me back years later was reading The Sabbath by Heschel. So this actually goes to the question of, should we be reading books by other people not by other people, by non-believers? And if we are going to be reading books by non-believers, should we recommend them to people?
That's a fair question. It's a good question. And
I try not to recommend too many books, especially by non-believing Jewish authors. And the reason why is because non-believing Jewish authors tend to get into Kabbalah, which we mentioned about Heschel, right? He has a wide range of writing, everything from philosophy down to Jewish mysticism and interacting with Christians and whatnot. I try to not recommend people who are outright Kabbalists or rest on Kabbalistic works. And I do that because I think that a lot of the time it's a trap. But, there are some really, really good scholarly books by people who are not believers. So, for instance, now I don't know what the faith of a lot of the scholars are that I read. I don't know if Jody Magnus is religious or not, but she is a fantastic archaeologist, and she's written some of the predominant works on Qumran and whatnot. So I don't think that you can really write a book on Qumran or do work on Qumran unless you're actually interacting with her. In the same way, I can't, in my thesis work, I can't write a good thesis without at least interacting with and looking at what Bart Ehrman has to say about Luke 22:17 through 20.
That's
it's just,
right.
And Bart Ehrman is definitely not a believer.
There's kind of a pastoral angle to responding to this question. It's a really good question, because all things being, if everybody was the same, if everybody's temperament and personality and critical attention to detail was the same, then there would be one general principle that you could say, yeah, okay, read anything you want, but know why you're doing it, know who the author is, try to be, to the best of your ability, see what their agenda is, and then be aware that while you're reading their work, their agenda is going to, and bias is going to be woven in, right? It's inextricable from what their engagement with whatever their sources are. Now, that being said, from that pastoral perspective, not every believer has the same strengths or competencies. So there might be a book that I would have no problem referring one person to, but there might be another person I'd say I don't think they should even look at that book, right? And there's a sense of subjectivity there, who's to say? But we live in a time where reading, there are millions and millions and millions, pardon me, of books in the world, and the vast majority of those books are probably not written by believers.
Right.
So, just as to be in this world and not of it, if I am not going to ever read anything, then I'm setting up this thing. I'm only going to read works by X, Y, and Z. Well, let's put that in a far example. Let's say I was a Mormon and I can only read Mormon, right? Or I'm a Jehovah's Witness and I'm only going to read Jehovah's Witness, or I'm a whatever. And we got to be careful about that.
Well,
right? Because that's where the sectarianism that insulation is not good.
So for me, the first thing that comes to mind, last night I sat down and I had forgotten the book that I'm actually reading. here at my office. And so I looked at my bookshelf. I have quite a few books that I haven't read on my bookshelf. And one of the things that I've cracked a couple of times but never really finished the whole thing, but know is very good, is The Mystery of Romans by Mark Nanos. And Dr. Nanos and I've met him numerous times. We chat usually every year at the SBL. And he's a fantastic scholar. And what he did in that book is really kind of push the limits and ask some very poignant questions and reinterpret Romans in a way that I think a lot of Messianics, Hebrew roots, Torah observant Christians really, really have benefited from because of his take on what Paul is saying. And what Nanos suggests is that Paul is actually he's pro-Israel at this point. So he's also talking to the Gentiles not to snub their nose at Israel, essentially.
Yeah, it's a much more Jewish reading of Paul.
Right. Well, to be honest, I'm not positive, but I think Mark Nanos is not a believer. I think that he's a Reform Jew. But that book is excellent. And so, but if that's the case, Paul is still, he's still going to the Jewish people. He's still, now, I'm not necessarily saying that, he's offering books by non-believers to other believers. And so it's a good warning and whatnot. But at the same time, I think that The Sabbath by Heschel is one of those books where he is passionate about the Sabbath, something a lot of Christians are not. And he puts that passion into a very eloquent way of speaking. And I think that's why that book is so beneficial for believers who are interested in the Sabbath, is because it looks at the Sabbath from a way that a born and raised Torah observant Jew looks at the Sabbath as this wonderful blessing. And so I think that's why it's that's why I would recommend it.
Sure. And the general principle then is know to the best that you can find out, learn about the author.
Don't miss any clips from Messiah Matters by clicking the subscribe button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and share it so other people can see it too.